a lot of people maybe have taken a lot of assessments. They maybe have received some kind of coaching or even education around how do you lead. But we believe the most effective leaders are ones who are leveraging their design, staying authentic to their design, and not trying to be perhaps like the other leaders who they have seen be successful.
Yes.
A lot of successful leaders as well will project their design onto others and say, well, this is the way that I've been successful, so just do what I did and you'll be good.
Yes.
And then we find out like, oh, that's so draining to me. Why aren't I good enough? Why?
Yes.
And imposter syndrome starts to come in, and it's like, yeah, that's probably because you're not being authentic to who you are.
Right. Welcome to Kingdom Over Everything. I am your host and Chief Fire Igniter, Shae Bynes. And I have with me a new friend of mine. His name is Joe Shannon. What's going on, Joe?
Hey, Shae, good to see you.
Absolutely good to have you. Now, Joe is the senior consultant at Newton Institute, which you will learn all about shortly. Joe, you and I connected because the last several months, maybe even over a year, I've been on this rabbit trail
Mm-hmm.
on the work that Alan Hirsch does with 5Q, The Forgotten Way, all the things, APEST, looking at the practical application of fivefold ministry and the marketplace. He focuses a lot on the church. But I've been always looking at it from the lens of marketplace because of the work that I'm doing. And
Mm-hmm.
somehow on this rabbit hole of an adventure, I landed in your inbox, Joe. And
Yep.
so we had a chance to connect maybe 2 or 3 months ago. It was a delight. And so thank you for joining me here today. I
Yeah,
appreciate it.
you're welcome. Yeah, it's good to be here.
All right. So, Joe, before we get into Newton Institute and the work you're doing there and all that marketplace goodness, I want to know more about Joe. So, tell me the important things to know about Joe that help me understand your right now.
Hmm. Yeah, it's a great question, and really that kind of it fits in so well with what we do at the Newton Institute. We're all about starting with who. Many people are familiar with the concept of starting with why,
Right.
but we believe that starting with design is really helpful. And so that usually is my first question: is who are you? And that informs so much of the other things. So I guess first and foremost, um, I live in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, around the Pittsburgh area, a small suburb called Washington, PA. And I moved to the States in 2011. I met my wife in London when she was visiting her sister. It's a big whirlwind Hallmark story. She was in London visiting her sister. We met, kept in contact. I moved over here, went through all of the process to live and work over here. And I grew up in the church. And
Wait. Hold on,
m-
hold on, hold on.
whoa. Sorry,
Wait.
am I skipping too
You
much?
skipped something. So is it because you said I went through the process to kind of come over here and work? Is this because you were like, I want to marry this woman, and so I'm going to figure this thing out, and I'm going to go to the United States? That was a catalyst.
That was the catalyst.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't come over for work or school or anything. And usually, when people start to hear my accent, right, the first question is, "What are you doing here? How did you end up here?" They have all these grand visions of what England and London is like,
Yes.
um, and why would you be here? And so, yes, we met, and we met in church, and yeah, moved over here. Kind of had a long distance relationship. This was before FaceTime.
Okay.
And so, we were emailing. A couple of years into it, we had a webcam so we could actually see each other, but the connection was really poor. And so, yeah, we saw each other every 3 months, roughly, for about 2 or 3 weeks at a time.
Wow.
Yeah, sooner or later, the question was, okay, what are we doing here?
Right.
Uh, someone's got to move if we want to continue this,
Yes.
and so I decided to move over. And at the
Wow.
time, I was uh, when we got engaged. I guess I was 19,
Oh,
so I
wow.
was pretty young. This was a big decision, and a lot of my friends were like, "Wait, hang on, what are you doing again?" Because none of my friends at that time were particularly interested in getting married.
Right.
Most were in college and all of that kind of stuff. And so this was a very radical concept. And yet for me, there was just something deep inside me. I was like, this is right. And I
Wow.
didn't have a guaranteed job. I didn't have, a car at the time. We didn't have a place to live until, we decided that I was going to move over, and then we were going to get married. And there's lots of details to go into around the reasons that you're allowed to move over. And obviously mine was to get married. And so
Yes.
there's a specific visa that you have to go through and all of that stuff. And there's a longer version of that story. But ultimately I landed here, and had all the right paperwork, and they have let me stay so far.
Wow. So how old were you when you actually came to the States? Were you 20 by then?
I was 20 by then.
Okay. All right. So you come to the United States. Keep going. I'm glad I took that detour. That's good
Yeah.
information. All right, keep going.
Yeah, it's easy to gloss over. So yeah, I was 20, moved here again. No promise of a job or anything, but just hey, we'll figure it out. We'll work it out. And my wife at the time was working in the kind of nursing field, and we got married. And then I don't know how much detail to go into, but long story short, in 2014, my wife fell pregnant, and I also got in touch with Rick Newton, who was a elder in our church, and big family friend. My wife's family was very close with him. And he had heard that I did graphic design, video production. I was just kind of doing it, dabbling in it, really. I didn't study for it. But did things for the church, did things for friends and family, and they had some needs with the business. Rick owned a consulting company which served Fortune 1000 companies and mid-market companies. And so that's his career. And he said, hey, I've been wanting to start this leadership arm of the business, partnering up with a different thought leader. And we're going to need a ton of graphics and video and design and all of that kind of stuff. Do you think that would be something you're interested in? And it's funny because he kind of, he didn't want it to be like, hey, I'm going to bring this guy in.
Right.
He put my name forward to the marketing director at the time, and I went through all the interviews and did a couple of pilot projects. But that really was my foot in the door to get to know all of the different mindsets that Rick had around business and kingdom business, and I really hadn't been exposed to that much before growing up in
Yeah.
England. So it was a wonderful journey.
Wow. And then how about your faith background, Joe? So it sounded like,
Yeah.
you were 19, you met your now wife in a church. So it sounds like you were raised in church.
Yes. Yeah. But right before you stopped me, that I was going to get into that story, which is great. I'm sure I was going to miss and leave out too much. Yeah, my parents went to church, and I went with them. And I would say I would categorize it as, for those who may be familiar, it's an Elim Pentecostal church.
Mm-hmm.
And when you say Pentecostal in the States, it can have some different connotations.
Absolutely.
When you say charismatic in the States, it can have some different connotations. But I would say it was a pretty experiential experience of church. There was the balance of spirit and truth, but for the most part, there was a big journey ahead of me once I got into the States around, what does it mean to apprentice under Jesus?
Yes.
And follow him and be with him, become like him, do what Jesus did. All of that kind of formation, spiritual formation. I didn't have much of that other than experiential and, times in worship. And I read my Bible and pray, do good things. But there was a real journey after that. Once I got here that just deepened.
That's awesome. So did that come in the context of once you joined in with the work with Newton Institute? So basically based off of the work that they were doing, you were also learning and growing in what it looks like to do business in the way of Jesus with Jesus. All of that coming in the context of you doing this work?
Yeah, there was a number of catalysts. Work and, Rick's teachings that he was being exposed to and influencing and sharing with other people. And what does it mean to operate with biblical principles, but not inside the church?
Right.
That was a huge catalyst. There were some other things as well, like John Mark Comer and all of his teaching around spiritual formation, Tyler Staton. There was a lot of different resources that
Yes.
kind of meshed together. But honestly, I'd never heard the kingdom advancement message before I came to the States, at least that I remember.
Yeah.
It wasn't something that went in really. And, I was young, but yeah, the concept of advancing God's kingdom, having a ministry outside of the four walls of the church, doing more than just giving your tithe and praying and going on overseas missions trips,
Right.
talking about renewal and restoration of, God's kingdom here on earth now, heaven coming to earth. All of that stuff was new
Yes.
to me, but amazing.
Yeah. So good. Okay. So how many years ago was that when you started with Newton Institute?
It was 10 years ago.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome. All right. So let me ask this before we get into some of the things that you guys have been digging into now. So you personally, when it comes to, for those who aren't familiar with like APES model, fivefold ministry giftings, where do you tend to lean strongest, Joe?
For me personally,
Yes.
so I am an interesting what we call expression of the gifts.
Yes.
The first thing that we always say to people is, whether it's APEST or Impact, it's not a personality assessment.
Right.
People tend to just group things that, it's personality stuff. I love personality assessments. And we always say, a lot of assessments are out there. There's so many, but they all measure different things.
Yes.
And so something that a lot of people are familiar with, Clifton Strengths, where you have your top 5, your 34 strengths. That's talents, and some people call capabilities, but talent themes is kind of the way they position it. Then you have things like personalities, so Myers-Briggs. A lot of people are familiar with DISC and M-code, and predictive index is a little bit more in the corporate world. There's so many. But with Impact, I score high in what we call pioneering and championing. And to translate that back to APES language is apostolic and evangelist.
Yes.
And I grew up in the church hearing those words, right? And I know Alan is such a big proponent of the power of words and understanding the depth and the complexity and what's beneath the covers of just the word apostle.
Right.
I think a lot of people have, if not misunderstood, some people have even abused those titles.
Facts.
And said, I'm an apostle, I'm an evangelist, this is what I do. And I always sort of disassociated from I'm not on the corner of a city with a megaphone, winning souls for Christ necessarily. Yes. But what is my part? What is my role? And in my unique context and with my unique personality and drivers and skills and all of those different motivations that I might have, getting clarity to those things. But yeah, in terms of impact language, it's pioneering and championing. And there's a lot of depth and detail that I've learned over the past sort of 6-7 years that I've been deeply ingrained in coaching people with this and coaching teams with this.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, so then let's talk about that, because you mentioned impact. People are like, I don't know what impact is. What is that? And so I love that you also gave the context around there's different types of assessments, right? So impact is an assessment. In fact, that was the entry point of me getting to know you guys, was because I was having conversations with people around the desire to have assessments that did not have the Christianese in it, but was rooted in kingdom principle for work with clients. That, because I've worked with a lot of CEOs that I could do I could talk to them straight Bible, we're having that conversation, but with their teams, they wanted tools that would translate, right? Exactly. That's how we ended up with you. So talk about impact and what you guys are doing there, and also, and give me the context for what Newton Institute overall is doing and how impact is a part of that.
Yeah. There's a lot of rabbit trails I could go down, so you might have to interrupt me again.
That's fine.
I'm with you. Answer both parts of that question. But
I'm with you.
The first part, Alan Hirsch was connected with Rick, who, again, he's a consultant. He's led a lot of projects, technology implementation, all of that stuff. I'm selling him very short there, but that was the connection. It was Alan was connected with Rick to say, hey, I think we can, create what was being requested from a lot of people in the 5Q world and Alan's world to say, hey, if this principle of APEST can be applied beyond the church, we absolutely need to understand the language. We need to understand the biblical foundation. We need to understand the differences of the gifts as it relates to the church. But beyond that, once we have that foundation, is this something I can use in my business? And the answer was always yes. And yet the APEST assessment is just very Christian in nature, right? There's references to biblical vocation and stuff like that. And so what initially started as just, oh yeah, we can translate the existing assessment and translate the output of the existing assessment, and let's start using that. And it's funny because along the journey, other people have sort of tried to do that in different ways. It's like, I'll just translate this to that. And we quickly found that there was a real need to rethink. Okay, in the marketplace context, some of these things are a little bit hard to translate. It doesn't quite fit there. And so, at one point in the process, I was part of the collaborative team, a broad team of many people from different backgrounds and skill sets to say, okay, let's blow up what was the APEST assessment and say, how would we design this for the purpose of the marketplace, and what kinds of questions will we ask? And you get into so many different details around sentiment analysis, and making sure you're not asking two things at the same time. But what that meant was we came up with an entirely new framework, entirely new set of questions, but really digging deep into, okay, what are these 5 different gifts? What is their purpose? And what is that going to do if these, what we call intelligences, sometimes they're called expressions or gifts, but what are these bringing to a team? Why did Christ give these gifts? Again, all of this is kind of foundation for how do we apply this beyond the church, where there would be a barrier of faith-based language, but it's rooted and grounded in that teaching. And there's just so much depth and so much life and so many wonderful principles that come out of applying this work, helping people identify. The assessment helps identify what expression you have, but it's up to the person to embrace that, to say, oh, this really is who I am, and I do see this showing up in my life across different teams and different projects that I've been part of. And then it needs to be activated. Right. You need to say, okay, it's all well and good that I might know who I am and I embrace it for myself, but boy, I need the people I'm collaborating with to get it. I need them to understand me, respect me, and receive me for who I am. And I need to do the same for other people. Right. So it has kind of built in this serving mentality, this humility to say, I don't have everything. I am not a well-rounded leader. I need other people around me. And it's just a beautiful thing. And you can say all of that without talking about the biblical reference. And it's powerful to see that activated beyond the church.
Yeah, that's so good. So let's let's map it out real quick so for people to understand. So the A being a apostle or apostolic, what do you guys call that? Pioneer?
Yes. Okay. Yeah, it's probably easiest if I talk about it in the impact language, just for my brain to remember.
Yeah, break them down for me.
Each letter in impact, whether you hide the I or not, we're impacting teams. Each letter in impact stands for one of the 5 quotients. So M stands for mentoring. And again, that isn't just the vocation of mentoring someone else in a typical mentoring capacity, but it's people who want to focus on relationships and community. They're really going to value people. They're really going to want to create a sense of belonging, and so they're very, very close to the shepherding gift or the pastoring. P stands for pioneering. And this is all about mission and movement. This is the apostolic gift coming through. And so, bold risk-taking, people who like strategy, people who want to develop plans, people who want to see things multiply, not just grow numerically, and come up with strategies, think about things from a high-level perspective, big picture perspective, but making sure the mission has some movement to it. Then A stands for aligning. This is the prophetic, and the real essence of the prophetic gift inside of Ephesians 4, it's about aligning people to the truth. A lot of people might say, well, I received a prophetic word, and it's like, yeah, and that is an aspect of it, but you're aligning people to the truth of who they are, the truth of their identity.
Yes.
So when we think about aligning in the context of a marketplace team, right, what's the purpose of this organization? Why do we exist? Where is the meaning found in the work that I'm doing, the work that the project is, advancing, the products we're creating, but also how are we showing up? What are our values? What are the things that we need to hold each other accountable for? Again, aligning people back to that truth of why this organization exists and how it serves its customers. Then championing, which is the C, which is the evangelist. And this focuses on connection and cause, so bringing people to the organization. It could be at the team level, could be at the organization level, but they really care about the message. They really care about inspiring people. They usually can work very well with people with high aligning to actually communicate the message. They might communicate on a stage, or they might communicate one-on-one, or just through presentations or graphics that they create. So we never want to sort of pigeonhole people to say, oh, you're a champion, that must mean you love getting on the stage.
Right.
There's a lot of nuance beyond that.
Yes.
And even people in the church, right? You could be evangelistic and not have an evangelism ministry.
That part.
And you just work
Yes.
one-on-one.
That's right.
And that's great. And just releasing people that that's okay is a wonderful gift. Last one is teaching, which is the same as we see in Ephesians 4. It just kind of made sense to not change it. And that really, again, we've got to be careful with some of the language, because teaching has this connotation that, oh, well, I'm a professor or I'm a lecturer who's speaking to a class and transferring knowledge. And that can be true. There are a lot of teachers who show up high in teaching, that is their vocation. And then we have people who that's the furthest thing from what they're doing, but they really care about continuous learning and legacy, making sure that lessons are passed on, making sure that information is available, making sure that we're researching, making sure that we're categorizing information, making sure there's a good process for the way that we do things. And that can sometimes show up in training, or it can show up in sales, or it can show up in product development.
That's right.
Having a high teaching expression on your team is going to sustain, where conversely something like high pioneering, that's more about scaling and multiplication and growth. And so again, what we're doing with Impact is saying, who do we collaborate with? How do we collaborate with people? Because my expression of these gifts is absolutely essential for the team. And someone else who's completely different to me is absolutely essential for the team if it's going to reach its full potential.
That's right.
You can have an unbalanced team, and you can have a team that is required to raise something up. But I give the example. I think it gets really tangible when there's an example. If it's a tech startup company, you might have at the very beginning, a lot of pioneering, a lot of aligning. We want to grow something, we want to build something. Then along the way, the championing comes in to advance the message and share the message and get people interested and talk about growth and talk about milestones and inspire people. But if you don't have teaching on the team represented at all, that's where things start to either break down, or you stop training people well, or the training is kind of thrown together and customers get a little disillusioned or employees get a little disillusioned because we're moving so fast.
That's right.
We're growing, but there's nothing sustaining what we've built, and everyone's learning individually rather than as a whole. And so again, there's so many examples that I could give around how this gets contextualized to a team, but just understanding my place in the team, understanding my contribution to the team, and wanting to learn about who do I need to partner up with when I'm collaborating.
Yeah.
It's powerful.
That's really good. I'm curious about some of the behind the scenes of the development of this. So,
Mm-hmm.
you're a bunch of folks who have a heart for kingdom advancement. And so you absolutely, so that's your foundation. Your foundation is the scripture, right? And you're just like, this is about kingdom advancement. So this has got to be, God's way of being and doing things. Like that's right at the foundation. We also recognize that we have to translate this in a way that makes sense and is
Mm-hmm.
contextualized for someone, whether they believe in the words in scripture or not. What I'm
Yeah.
curious, since you're on the collaborative team, I can ask you this question, but I'm curious to know when with that assignment before you, what were some of the tension points or challenges that you had to work through to feel like you guys collectively were maintaining
Mm-hmm.
the authenticity of what this thing was about, while also looking to appeal and have understanding from those who may or may not have value necessarily for that foundation that you're speaking of? Like, what was that like for
Yeah.
you guys? And maybe still like for you guys, because I know that this is a process.
Yeah, it was really cool to be part of. It was very eye opening. Again, you're kind of getting immersed in these principles and these deep thoughts about the differences and the sort of lines that you draw between the different quotients. The other thing about this is we're not just ascribing one letter to someone, right? And saying, oh, you're highest in this, and so that's who you are. You're highest in pioneering, so you love to plow new ground and take risks. There's loads of nuance behind how this shows up, but also, what we identify as the couplet is your top two
Yeah, I
quotients.
like this
Just
part.
think about if you're highest in pioneering and your second quotient is mentoring, that means you're going to bring a very relational community
Yes.
approach, sense of belonging, valuing people. Um, versus if your second quotient is teaching, you're going to bring a very, focus on sustaining, focus on facts, focus on insights and mining for data and making sure lessons learned are passed on. That's two very different people, despite having pioneering as the
Right.
highest. So we really try to bring a lot of depth there. I think as it relates to the collaboration, um, it made for a rich process of discussion
Yes.
in terms of here's a question and here's two options. I think it should be this. Well, you're kind of missing that aspect of it, and you're not getting this. And then we would come back to the wider group, and they would say, "Well, you can't really say that because that's a little bit of a crossover of teaching, And so, really getting focused to make sure that each statement was laser focused on if someone picks that is representation, a good
Yes.
representation of high teaching, and not a crossover or a blend of the two, right? And that was probably the hardest part and the most time-consuming part. And obviously, we had Alan really involved in the collaboration at that point with specific statements and questions, and he's got loads of data. All of his books are filled with tables of different comparisons of the quotients. And so we start with the first draft of a question and a statement and those options, and each question, I don't know, probably took hours to just refine and go
Yes.
through different iterations and say, okay, that's it. And then once we were finished with the first draft, you go back through and you say, oh, actually, no, that there's a little bit of crossover there. There's a little bit of tension there. A lot of, a lot of work went into that. Ultimately, we went into, the technical validation process, which is kind of above my pay grade. But we had someone who was managing that project and took a pool of people, a large pool of people, through the assessment and did some initial validation and calculations and comparison. And I think then we did another, and there was some more drafts based on those results.
Yes.
And then we did another validation, right? And so it's been through its paces in terms of making sure that it's not just, hey, Rick got into a room and got on his laptop and came up with 100 questions, and now here they are.
Yes. So the main people. So when was impact assessment created? Is this a few years ago, or how recent are we talking?
Yeah, I think the initial discussions were 2015. I think we officially started working on it between 16 and 17. So it's been around for, a few years at this point.
So I'm suspecting, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that a lot of the people that are saying, "Hey, I want to give this a whirl. I want to take this and I want to have this with my teams," they themselves are probably kingdom focused people, which is why they find value in the fact that your foundation is in a fivefold ministry expression model. But then they're able to take that, and then regardless of the mixed faith backgrounds of their teams, they have a tool that's rooted there. I'm assuming that's the audience. You can correct me if I'm wrong. I'm curious to know, what are some of the things that you've been hearing and learning from those who, or even some surprises that you've experienced from people actually leveraging this assessment and tool in their teams.
Yeah, there's so many examples, and I think that's why I've gained so much experience, because it's not just, hey, here's the assessment, let us know how it goes.
Right.
We've been working with them, we've been piloting, I've coached hundreds of people through their assessments one-on-one. I've coached so many teams around, okay, what's the balance of this team and what do we do about it? I think that you're right in the assumption that most people who I would probably put in the early adopter phase, maybe innovator phase of being interested in this and saying, what's that resource, are people who understand where it comes from. They're very familiar with 5Q, and maybe they've heard of Alan's work through the church, but they own a business, and
Right.
it's like, oh, I can use that in my business. That's great, because there's so many tools out there. As Christians, being able to use tools that are rooted and grounded in biblical principles that promote the kind of values and maybe even virtues that are important to us, like I was talking about before, that just emphasis on others.
Yes.
If you do a lot of assessments out there, it tends to be, well, this is me, this is who I am,
That's
here's
right.
my report, and go and learn about me, and okay, yeah, I'll learn about you, and that's great. But all of these questions and all of these insights are coming from the standpoint of, how do you contribute to the team? How do you elevate other people on the team? How do you elevate the team as a whole? How do you define success for the team? And recognizing that depending on your expression, it's going to be very different. And we need all of them.
Yes.
It is not, one is not better than the other. They're all valuable and all different. And just being able to have that humility, I think some of the results that we've seen, I would say every team that I personally have worked with, usually the leader is the one who knows where it comes from, wants to apply it, wants to experiment it with the team. But we don't talk about, the deeper language, because lots of members of the team either have no faith or have different faith, or they're somewhere on the fence, they're not sure. And so we've never positioned it as, this is a Christian tool and we're
Right.
just going to take the language out, right? It's always been, no, this stands in the corporate world, and the principle that it either works or it doesn't, it is one that's, I think, guided us. This isn't just a tool that Christians have developed, and let's be honest, maybe there's a little bit of non-profit, like, oh, it's rough around the edges,
Right.
let's bring it into our business, and like, yeah, well, we know it's not that good.
Right.
It's high class. Everything
Yes.
is well done. A lot of our certified coaches say, this is better than a lot of other tools that we've used before. It's just very professional. And so what I've seen in those team members who, we don't talk about Ephesians 4, we don't talk about the church, we don't talk about these being gifts that Jesus gave, and yet what is catalyzed is we find common ground, we find common language, we start to desire the best for others. We
Yes.
start to desire others to reach their full potential. We start to want to elevate our contribution to the team if we've been coasting. We want to understand why I'm really butting heads with that person because we're like this.
Yes.
And we start to have language for why that might be. Not just that they're a horrible person and I'm right, but I want to understand.
Yes.
Okay, this person is higher in mentoring. I'm really low in mentoring, and I am high in teaching, and so there's just a different definition of how we would approach this problem. There's a different approach to communication. There's a different approach to leadership. I want to understand why that is and how we can collaborate, how we can benefit from each other, not just being competition.
Yes.
We worked with a sales team, a number of different sales teams across a geography, and they were 100% commission. They were a relatively small team, but any time that they were on the sales floor was an opportunity to make more money at the end of the month, right? And yet they were part of this team, and there was this sense that we're a team, we're a store. Our store has goals, and we are not necessarily in competition with the other stores, but we want to present ourselves well. And when they started to do impact, and they started to understand, okay, this person might be way better at helping me think through the messaging, or helping me think through the order that I'm going through things, or help me think through, the specifics of what are the benefits of our products, and just kind of coaching each other, recognizing, hey, some people are stronger in this, other people are not, but understanding, respecting, and receiving those differences and working together, being humble to say, I need you and you need me. I think about that in terms of a lot of relationships, right? How many of us want a kind of relationship where we can challenge them and they can challenge us?
Right.
That's a beautiful kind of relationship to be part of, and bringing that into the team environment is just transformational.
Yeah, that's good. I heard as you were sharing in there a little earlier on, you mentioned you're certified. I don't know what you said. You said certified something, and it caught my attention. So you guys are also certifying. Are they consultants that you're certifying in this, and then they are then leveraging this tool with their clients? It's like what's that about? Certification.
Yeah, honestly, it's still kind of in a lot of ways pilot.
Yes.
We've been through certification in terms of not how do you coach people, but how do you use impact to make the report come to life, make the report sing, make people say, oh, that is me, or I have examples of that. And then how do you bring that into the team environment, and what's some best practices that we've identified through doing this, and
Yes.
and what's a good process to walk through a team so that you're not just fire hosing them with another assessment and then you move on.
Right.
There's just a lot of, I'd say, frameworks and tools
Yes.
and workshops and one-on-one coaching strategies and guides and all of that stuff. We're like, okay, so we need to give people this information, and so right now we're in development of a new version of what certification specifically for impact looks like, but we have a pool of coaches who are working with their own clients, and this is another tool in their tool belt. That's the other beautiful thing about this, is we don't believe that this replaces everything else.
Right.
This is not the assessment that you should use and ignore StrengthsFinder.
Yes.
Absolutely, it works with others because it's a different aspect of who you are. It's a different DNA marker.
Yes.
And identifying those DNA markers is what we believe is so critical to understanding who I am.
Yeah.
And I think one of the greatest forms of servant leadership is, as a leader, understanding who you are. Right, so that you can be the best version of yourself, best serve your team and your organization, know how to leverage your design. But also, teams are going to flourish when each team member's design is understood, respected, and received. So it kind of cascades throughout the organization. And so helping other coaches, other facilitators to do that work with teams that we might not have, the influence, might not have the connection, might not have the network. We want to empower as many coaches, consultants to do this kind of team collaboration, team dynamics work. And it can be done in terms of optimizing what's already there. So
Right.
sometimes we work with teams who, they're doing okay, they're hitting their numbers, everyone's happy, but they want to grow, they want to multiply, they want to, advance to a new territory, develop a new product. So they know that they're going to be introducing new team members to the team. Now we can start to use this as a way to ensure the culture remains and
Yes.
multiplies
Yes.
organically. But also we have teams where there's conflict and there's disagreement and there's dysfunction and we're not hitting our numbers and our revenue is down. And how can we collaborate?
Yes.
Not treat this as an individual, like, well, as long as I do my work, we're good.
Right.
No, outside of that, how
Yes.
can you help your team reach its full potential, your organization reach its full potential? So it's, again, I keep saying it's powerful when
is.
you see it in action.
Yeah, no, I love that. So then what are you guys excited? I know, so that's one that's connected to the other question I was going to ask you, which is, I know that's one element of things that you all are focused on now with Newton Institute. What all else has got to have you guys playing with and working through and excited about right now?
Is this a 3-hour podcast?
Pick your favorite one or two things.
Well, I think it's helpful to say, in the context of where we started, which is impact.
Yeah.
That started our conversation just now. That is very focused on the teams, right? How do we collaborate? How do we elevate collaboration? How do we understand who we're working with across the table? We do a program which we call Flourishing Teams, which combines lots of different elements, and that's at the team level. I can go into that if you're interested, but we also focus on the leadership level. And so specific leaders, helping leaders become more effective by leveraging their unique design. A lot of people maybe have taken a lot of assessments. They maybe have received some kind of coaching or even education around how do you lead. But we believe the most effective leaders are ones who are leveraging their design, staying authentic to their design, and not trying to be perhaps like the other leaders who they have seen be successful.
Yes.
A lot of successful leaders as well will project their design onto others and say, well, this is the way that I've been successful, so just do what I did and you'll be good.
Yes.
And then we find out like, oh, that's so draining to me. Why aren't I good enough?
Yes.
And imposter syndrome starts to come in, and it's like, yeah, that's probably because you're not being authentic to who you are.
Right.
And there's sort of skills and there's responsibilities of your role for sure. We're trying to say, okay, but what's going to be most exciting and energizing and natural to you, and how do we fit your role around that? And then the third level is organizational level. And this is where we start to get into the concept that, not just people have a design, because if we have a design, that means we were designed for a purpose.
Right.
The start with who is all about at the organizational level. You might have a strategy. You might have a team who creates a strategy. You might have some products that you want to create. But in terms of who you are as an organization, we always use the example of Apple. They, under Steve Jobs' leadership, right, just revolutionized industry after industry after industry, and created. And innovation was a huge part of their story and who they were as an organization. It embedded itself into their values. It embedded itself into the products they created, how they connected with customers. And there's a unique, specific DNA of Apple. And when they were under different leadership, under John Sculley, things went a little, what are we doing here? We were focused on profits. We're focused on all of that stuff.
That's right.
There's a big story there.
Yes.
And they stopped thinking about the customer. They stopped thinking about why they exist. And getting back to that DNA under Steve Jobs just absolutely skyrocketed everything. So what we do with organizations is help them identify the DNA of the organization.
That's good.
before getting into things like values, right? You can just pick your values. Oh, it's integrity, it's humility, it's stewardship. These are good values to have, but what are the ones that are really in line with your DNA? And what should we be doing? What should we focus on as an organization in the next 2 to 3 years because of who we are, because of why we exist, because of the way that we operate?
I have a lot of
Yeah.
value for that. Being on the other side of no longer being the CEO of the company that I
Hmm.
co-founded, where there's a DNA of why this exists that was always bigger than me. So it
Hmm.
also couldn't be rooted in my personality or my unique design. Obviously, I had to bring my unique design to the
Yep.
expression of what it is. But I have a lot of value for that organizational DNA perspective, because if you have that and you're intentional around that, then that means as you're building team, the people around you are all understanding that, and you're able to identify and even value and honor all of those things within other people. Then when you are in the process of, you're going to be stepping away in the next year, next two, next three, you can do
Hmm.
that with knowing that your departure from that seat doesn't make everything around the organization implode. So I
Yep.
have a lot of value for what you guys are doing with that, because that's been part of, I mean, I'm not absent from it. I'm
Hmm.
now the executive advisor for it, but it's very different than being in the seat of CEO, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so,
When you're
yeah, that's really
CEO,
great.
you're thinking about very different things than founder. And
Yeah.
why was this started? Why did it
Yes.
exist? Who were some of our biggest customers at the beginning who resonated with this? What are the
Yes.
kind of dreams that we have?
That's right.
Um, and I think, once you have answers to these questions, that we call it the compass, the Newton compass, and you're basically answering four questions, which is, who are we
Hmm.
as an organization? And there's a lot of depth to that. Why do we exist? Which is kind of gets into purpose language. How are we going to leave the world a better place? Um, how do we operate? How do we live? What are the things that are guiding principles that we're going to hold people accountable to? And then what's our key focus?
Yeah.
And that might be 2 to 3 years, might be 3 to 5 years. But when you have answers to those questions, yeah, a lot of people, again, they'll come up with a strategy. They might come up with some mission statement or something. But if you don't start with who, there can either be a problem of comparing yourself to the competition.
Right.
What are they doing? How are they innovating? And instead of staying true to your authentic self, but it's going to affect the alignment of the entire organization. You're going to be able to articulate to people why their work matters. Leadership effectiveness is going to go up. It's going to inform your strategy. We sometimes say it's a foundation for strategy, because you need to have answers to these questions. It affects your branding, it affects your customer relationships, it affects your culture, it affects how you develop products, when you develop products, it affects employee engagement and hiring and relationships with the community. So it's so fundamental.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you just maybe you're just doing a lot of different things and
Yeah.
seeing that hopefully something will work.
What's the what's the difference, what's the kingdom lens on that compass that's different from, let's say, corporations out there, or leadership consultancies that say, hey, we're going to help you with corporate identity, all those things. Like, what's
Hmm.
the kingdom difference between the compass and just kind of standard the way the world does these types of topics?
Yeah, I mean, for me, and Rick would probably have a lot to say about that. But I think what I've experienced, what I've seen happen in the boardroom as people are going through these definitions, what I've seen when I've seen the light bulb go on, like, oh, that's it, that's what we need to be saying, and the marketing person gets excited because now they have something that's unique. I think the kingdom difference is starting with who, starting with design,
Hmm.
to say if God even wanted this organization to exist, that means he wanted it to accomplish a specific purpose. But we know with anything in the natural world, right? If a purpose exists, there's got to be a design around who will do that well? How do I design the people that are going to ultimately represent this organization? And so
Yes.
it kind of goes down different levels, but I think it's the fact that you know, God has a purpose and an intent for an organization to exist, to do good works,
Yes.
to provide value to customers, right? We're not talking about ripping people off and gouging people and burning them into the ground so that we can make money for ourselves, right? There's
Yes.
a bigger purpose behind why a marketing agency exists, right? They're not just there to help people sell more. They're there because they need help with the clarity of their information.
Yeah.
And they need help thinking through a good process and thinking through a good campaign and strategizing how that all works. And coming with beautiful design and creativity and the skills and the application to be able to make videos and websites and to help people understand why this marketing, why this organization, this client that they're working with exists.
Yeah.
There's a specific design where people who might be part of that marketing agency would be really effective at that, right? Which is different from someone who maybe works in a library and who's doing research and categorizing information. I think,
Right.
you know, that analogy is so useful to say, if this organization exists to bring renewal to the world, the people who are part of that organization should be designed in such a way that that organization could be successful.
Yeah.
So that's the kingdom difference in my mind, that God has a purpose and intent and good works for us to do.
Yeah.
You know, work is not, this probably gets into the work conversation a little bit, work is not just the 9 to 5 where you're rolling your eyes and you're trying to get through so that you can live for that weekend experience, or frankly the Sunday morning experience,
Right.
right? I made it to church. I'm so glad. This is great. And now,
Yes.
oh, Monday's coming. Oh, I hate my job. This is the worst. This is such a punishment, right? And
Yes.
that's reality for a lot of people. I think there's a belief that God has more than that. God is abundant.
Yes.
He's generous. He has a plan for your life. He has a vision for how you could contribute greatly in the world and make a difference that He designed you to make.
I love that. So what I'm hearing in that is just the fact that you are starting with who, starting with original design and intent. That by itself is a kingdom lens and differentiator in this
Mm-hmm.
conversation, because many will start with why, and many will also start with what.
Yep.
And so the kingdom difference on that is actually starting from the unique design in which it is created to serve a certain purpose. That in and of itself.
Yeah. That's the quick
Starting.
version.
Yeah. I'm good at bullet pointing.
Yeah.
But I loved everything that you shared. That's so good. I love that. If you have time, I have one other question I want to explore with you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So where do you think, I know we've been having a conversation a lot around the foundation of fivefold ministry expressions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where do you see where all these various other spiritual giftings that we read about in the scriptures, where do you see these things connecting in this conversation around the who and the design? Since you've probably got I haven't counted how many Holy Spirit gifts we've got in the scripture, but there's probably at least 20 something of them. Where do you see those in the picture of this alongside of the fivefold ministry expression?
Yeah, there's a lot there.
I know it's a big question.
My bullet point answer
Yeah.
would probably be, it's a beautiful journey to discover not only the fact that some gifts are for everyone,
Right.
some gifts are given specifically for people.
Yes.
And I think the difference with Ephesians 4 is that this is how you've been designed, you could say created, in the image of Christ.
Yes.
To be a participant in the body of Christ and beyond,
Yes.
right? That could be inside the church, that could be outside of the church, in the marketplace. But you're finding your place in the created order, in the work that you do, and in the church that you're part of, or the community that you're part of. And this is how you've been designed. So these gifts are for all, right? That's another sort of paradigm shift that I think Alan talks about
Yes.
in many of his books. But that these gifts are not just for leaders.
Right.
This is not just the evangelist on the stage or the apostle on the stage.
That's right.
You might have an apostolic gifting or a pioneering expression that is so necessary for the work that you're to do and the purpose that you were created. And I think some of the other gifts that we read in different passages, they can be more functional, or I have this ability, or I have this special resonance with, people again hearing the voice of God.
Right.
That can take so many different forms. God might speak to you in dreams or in visions or in specific words or in pictures, or you might feel comfortable to give those to people. Again, there's so much there, but I think Ephesians 4 is all about how we've been designed.
Yes.
And some of these other things are gifts that we can use, we can leverage, that
Yes.
that will empower and enhance who we are as a person.
That's good. And that was very clear. I like that. That's good stuff.
Thank you.
All right, Joe, if people want to get more information about the work you're doing around impact, Newton Institute in general, what's the best place for people to go?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, probably I'm always a big proponent for conversations. So if you want to just get to our website, if you're interested in impact specifically, it's impactq.com, which is the impact quotient.
Which does not start with the letter I, you guys.
That's right, MPACT.
Yes.
Yep. NewtonInstitute.com is our other website, which talks about all of the different tools that we have created and the solutions that we provide, working with coaches and working with leaders of organizations. But I am always down for a chat. That's usually my first port of call is, what are you interested in? What is resonating with you? Are you a team leader or an organization leader who wants to experiment with some of these solutions that we have? Let's talk about, where you're at, what's your team doing, what are you trying to accomplish, what's not working so far, what do you want to build or sustain, but also, coaches, consultants who are passionate about serving a variety of clients in different industries, geographies that, again, we can't reach.
Right.
And so we'd love to see how we can empower you to use some of these tools.
Good stuff. Joe, thanks for hanging out with me today. I've enjoyed this chat with you, and I appreciate you.
Thank you, Shae. Your questions are really thoughtful, and it's been great to dialogue with you.